So I've made a compilation film of the dialogue between myself and Dave Francis, which you must assume is his real name. There seems to be evidence provided. There's no evidence provided. He's been married for 20 years and he has 3 children. As you will understand as you go through this, my friends and I were rather suspicious about this man's identity. We were very suspicious that he was married, had been married 20 years. And I am very suspicious. But it would appear that this is a married man with 3 children, behaving the way that he is on this dialogue. So what had happened was on Thursday, the 20th of August 2021, he found me online and he befriended me. Now later on he denies that, but actually I could find the log of this if I unblocked him, because I've got him blocked. So later on I was going to do that, much as I don't particularly want this man unblocked. It seems to be the only way to get to the information, to make the screen grab, to prove that he found me in the first place. But later on in these dialogues he tries to make out that simply isn't the case, and that actually I found him, which is very odd. I didn't know anything about his films or himself. What then happened was that, being befriended, I found that he was making these films, had a look at them, and then commented on them online, because he was making statements that didn't seem to have any basis in reality, and challenged him, which is the slide you can now see. If I don't leave you enough time to read the slide, that's okay. It's a film. You can just stop it, read the slide, carry on with the narrative. But otherwise, the slide's going to be the length of what I've got to say about that particular piece. So now we have the first, which is for anyone to see. As with the rest of them, Dave Francis was meant to be able to see what I was saying to my friends about him, so he could comment. He wasn't blocked at that point. He would be 4 days later, 3. And he was always free to comment on Facebook Messenger, where I asked him to have a dialogue, because the things he was coming out with and the way he related himself, I was just quite convinced that he was going to get into trouble with my friends. People would start attacking him, people started abusing him. So I asked him to have a private conversation with me, because I said it wouldn't end well if you tried doing it publicly. And as you will see, he immediately started to say, "You're threatening me." And I said, "No, I'm not threatening, I'm trying to help you. And I don't threaten people online. I don't abuse people online. I'm very careful about what I put into writing." I remember before all of this in the early 80s, my father saying to me, "Always be careful what you put into writing." And this is what I've been doing with Facebook, Twitter, social media. Always remember, whatever you put into writing could be used. As a Buddhist, I don't abuse people. There's no need to abuse people. There's no need to fight back, fight fire with fire by using abuse. All you've got to do is be rational and straightforward with them. If they're going to make these statements, they're going to say these things to you that are unpleasant, contradictory, or even abusive. No. If you haven't got a decent argument, you shouldn't be talking to that person. Okay? And that's why I approach people. A, because I believe I have an argument. But B, I'd like to be proven wrong. I go into these situations not trying to assert my own authority on an idea or thinking I'm so clever, but I want to see if I'm wrong. I want to get my facts right. I want to get my ideas straight. Back in 2019, I dialogued a lot with a group on Twitter that collectively named itself the Autistic Dark Web. And these people were using particular tricks and techniques to assert the idea that the only real autism is severe disability, and that anyone like myself tries to be positive about their autistic nature is crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. And 2 of the techniques used were try to assert the fact that you are a narcissist and you are stupid. So in listening to what Dave was saying, I felt I found the same agenda. And then, as you will see in the dialogue, I think I found the same behavior. Obfuscation. You ask the man a straight question, you don't get a straight answer. He even counted the number of questions I asked him on Facebook and on his YouTube page. Did he answer them? You tell me. Exactly. It really is that simple. He had all the traits of this group, and it is a group, and it has a membership, and it has a leadership, and it can be traced, believe it or not, through people who communicate with and are friends with each other on a combination of Facebook and Twitter, and it's that simple. Everything I've just described is quite simply explained in the post you're looking at now, so have a read. And lastly, I'd like to point out that I have actually made friends online with people who have been in the firing line of these sorts of people, apparently using the same techniques, know full well what's going on, and compare notes on these people. At one point in 2019, a list was made of the characters who seemed to be involved in this scene, and there were definitely certain principal people. It got to the point where one of them, who was supposed to be this teenage boy who was an absolute genius, I got very friendly with him and dialogued with him. I'd been challenging his identity for quite some time, and then I apologised and conceded, okay, you are as young as you say you are. We had some brilliant conversations. He was such a clever man. It was a pity there was all these sides and sectarianisms going on, but the truth was that I think the sides and the biases and the them and us is also an invented thing, that you define a group that you don't like and you stand against, so you create an antagonistic scenario and you actually bait your opponents to the point where they just start attacking you whenever they see you, or they just start attacking full stop. Then you can make them out to be unstable, aggressive, unpleasant people. Recently I was told that in America somebody said neurodiversity is a hate group. What does that mean? Well, it refers to people who can be seen in members of the so-called neurodiversity movement. It comes from a doctoral thesis written by a woman called Judy Singer that I've met. The idea that there is a movement of autistic adults who are positive about their identity, politically active, representing themselves as a kind rather than victims of some mental health condition. So this is actually quite a funny thing. The man said, make a video, pop it on YouTube, and we will respond to one another, otherwise have a good one. You see, we'll go our separate ways. So, Dave, here I am. The next two slides are posted from the public Facebook dialogue, which will be quoted at length later on in this film. But for now, I want to show you how it all started. That Dave Francis spoke once in the dialogue, and he never spoke again. He could have commented at any time. It was all public. Even when we defriended on the Monday, he was still quite free to cut in and say anything he wanted to. But he never did. He kept his dialogue thereafter to a private dialogue we had on Facebook Messenger. Now, you see that I've said some inflammatory things in these paragraphs. For example, use vulnerable and gullible adults like yourself as sorts of attack dogs. He was entirely free to answer this back and defend himself. Well, what do you think? You're trying to drag me into making a fool of you. That's right. I thought the statements involved and the behaviour I'd seen so far was so bizarre that this man was just putting himself online to make a complete fool of himself. I couldn't understand it, the frame of reference he was using. I was also trying to bait him. I was trying to get the man to respond and justify himself and explain that I was wrong, make me apologise, make me see the error of my ways. But that's not what happened. You see, you use a number of approaches here. You state the facts. You also use language in order to get the individual to rise to the occasion and defend themselves. And this may seem the antithesis of what I said before, but it's called debate, it's called argument, and it's called fun. And he seemed to be up for a dialogue. He makes films, puts himself forward as someone like myself. So paranoid parents have roped you into their fantasy world in which terms like evil, neurodiversity movement, and toxic advocates are used. He's using language of toxic advocates. In some of his films, he's swearing away about the idea of autism not being a disorder and a disability. And he's being very aggressive, which is why I behaved the way I did. And you can still see his films where he criticizes people like myself. And what I tried to explain to him in the last paragraph is if you have autistic friends, hold views in common with them, maintain long-term stable and even loving relationships, have a job in your own home, live independently with a partner, and even go flying around the world on holidays, which he was talking about doing at that point. He was off on holidays, off to the airport. You do, I assume, understand, spelt wrong, that this all qualifies you for being a member of the so-called neurodiversity movement. Neurodiversity movement self-advocate, a high-functioning autistic. And then I asked, well, look, do you have any severely disabled autistic family members that you're representing? He claims he does. He claims he has 3 children. Also, you've got to look at the first paragraph. And what I say at the end of the severely disabled will always need more funding. Well, I believe that the parents have been talking about the reason they're doing what they're doing, abusing and attacking people. There's so much evidence of abuse and attack coming out of people's social media who are advocates like myself. It's because they believe that people like ourselves drain resources that would otherwise go to their children. They also believe that anyone says anything positive, it detracts from their great lifelong quest every day to save their children from autism, as they put it, to see them helped and cured, which is a pack of lies. There are several different communities, recognizable communities, in the world of autistic people. There are people who are severely disabled, cannot live independent lives, who are definitely disabled by their autistic natures, who you can say are disordered, have autism as a disorder. Then there are people like myself, where it's a moot point if you can get by in life. I used to be a low to average wage, low to average IQ, hyperactive Liverpool guy. Then I got my IQ measured, and it's like, well, where the hell did that come from? Where's that? Where's the money from that? And then I got my diagnosis for autism, and it's like, right, now it all makes sense. All that energy and ability I've got, it's just gone into coping. It's just gone into trying to pass like a normal person. And it hasn't gone into making money. So I ended up, once I knew what I was, I ended up married, job, secure, because I was aligned with my own reality. And then I don't think I qualify for being disabled. I mean, various things about me are definitely not perfect. And I would like some things in me to be different, no doubt about that. And I have dysfunctionalities, sure, I'm not perfect, but just can't help thinking, but a lot of people have got these things who aren't autistic or disabled at all. It's just how they are. That's life. You can only run so fast, you're only so tall. And then you get autistic people who hate being autistic, say it disables them, their OCD wipes them out, their ADHD energy is intoxicating, they have sensory issues, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all the different elements, which I call being autistic, umbrella term autistic. Many people would argue with me, say you've got it completely wrong, you don't use the term autism like that, it's a separate condition to all the other things I've just named, because there's all this war going on over the terms of frames of reference in autism. So I've just got my own one and I explain it, and then people know what I'm talking about. But yeah, arguments, fights are very typical of the social media world of autism, and it can get quite vicious, as you will see. And it should also be pointed out that this was the first time I'd confronted Dave Francis with questions and concepts. And I suggest you remember what I've posted here just to see if he addressed any of it. So now we'll go into the rest. So now for all you sports fans out there, we're in the interesting bit. The bell has gone, round 1. We're on Facebook Messenger. And as you can see, he's kicked off. And he's very nice. Look at this. I'm up to my eyes in more housework than I can handle at the minute. I'll reply later on when I get some downtime. Modern life, Paul. What a charming man. So I apologise to him about my behaviour on the dialogue that you just saw, and he says it's all fodder for me, mate. I don't mind, honestly. Oh, we're getting on so well so far. But then, please read my comments. If you carry on like this, others will get involved and it won't end well. And he's off. He's off. He replies, what are you talking about? If I carry on saying what I do, it won't end well. WTF convinced me to make what up? The only people I've encountered that are making threats or fighting are yourself and your cronies. What's the threat about, Paul? What threat? What are you talking about? What? Hey, what? I meant people will insult and abuse you. I'm trying to help you. Now, you may think that this is now an argument, that the man is insulted, he is intimidated. But what I see is somebody who is not addressing any of the issues I've raised. If it was me, I wouldn't have picked on that one single point and blown it out of all proportion. No, as you'll see, I try to explain that I'm not threatening him at all, but he seems to be rather unable to let it go. And this turned up the next day. Okay? As you can see, about 3:44 in the afternoon. I had no idea this was there until about a week later when I looked on his Facebook page, and I immediately blocked the man. Okay, at the end of this entire dialogue, I looked on his Facebook page and I found this thing. But a reason I place it here in the timeline is because this existed, I didn't see it. And then, as you will see, he had another dialogue with me several days later. So this is his account of what had just happened. Okay, that I saw his films, contacted him, dreaming up more conspiracies than Alex Jones. I assume what he's referring to is all the statements I've just made, which, yes, of course I can back them up. We can all back them up. We've seen this. And as you'll see, he uses the same tricks as these people I'm talking about. And he seems to have exactly the same attitude. If you look on his Facebook page, he references, there's a posting from a man to him as one of his friends who writes rhetoric for the people I'm talking about. And I can name this individual, and I can quote the post, and I can show you how he's connected to the people I'm talking about. It's very simple. Now, in this one, he quotes the private conversation, and look what he does. This apparently is my threatening him. And here we have the comments that I placed as soon as I found it on his site, which was a bit pointless because I thereafter immediately blocked the man, and that was the end of him, because I'm not getting involved in anything that scary. But this was the start of how we started to go from thinking he was learning disabled or perhaps had some comorbidity, as he gets called schizophrenic later on because he didn't understand what was going on. We go from that to realize this is a properly malevolent individual. So now we've come back to the dialogue, and we're going to follow the Facebook Messenger conversation. And we know where we are, 21st of August. So I'll just let you have a read through this. The comment, "I'm not surprised, Paul," was one of the first tells of what was going to come, as you'll see. I felt that I'd already made my points and there was no need to make a list at all because he understood them perfectly well, as he will point out later on because he's able to number them. So I didn't make a list, I just asked the primary question over and over, which you'll be able to work out. So later that day he came back and he posted a large section to me. You can have a good read of it. Well, you can read what I posted later on, and already you can see that he appears to be pretty desperate to have a fight. There's nothing gentle or delicate about this man's dialogue. He doesn't seem to be able to answer any of the charges which I'm saying here about what he posted in his films, or the way he started to talk to me already. It gets far worse than this. I generally got the impression he wasn't working alone, which accounted for all the gaps, the time gaps in posts and answers, that I think that the material I gave him was being gone over by others. And the above is a paraphrase summary of your Facebook post along with the threats you inferred. What threats? Given this is only 1 week since the Plymouth Aspie incident, my tolerance for delusional rants isn't what it once was. What earth is he talking about? I've never found out. Remember, so far you've threatened me and been aware and involved a bizarre trolling campaign. 1. If your contacts said won't start as he is unable to summon the interest. Bizarre problem picking anyway. Now that's a reference to my friend. And here he is. He's going to make the bramble comment after this slide. This is actually the dialogue which he's referred to, which I've jumped forward so you can see what we were saying, which he was quite free to comment on. We wanted him to comment on, we wanted him to justify himself, respond. If you could just please explain to us. Now, my friend there, as you can see, had already dialogued with this man in another group as he is explaining. We did have some interaction in an Irish private group yesterday. Initially, he came across as a regular troll, but it became clear after a couple of comments that he was 95% parroting rather than reasoning. And then we've got the reference by me through it's some sort of black comedy sketch, the way he was behaving on his films and the way he talks to people, which we found very, very strange. Well, you may see that this is abusive and aggressive, but like I said, the man was always quite free to answer, and we were saying what we were saying because we didn't know what else to make of it, because we are so used to receiving abuse and aggression on social media. We were just trying to make sense of what he was saying, and I've already explained the attitudes that he was putting over. He seemed to believe that people like ourselves are some sort of monsters, some kind of evil trolls, some kind of people taking away support and funding from the severely disabled just because we've got a positive outlook on being autistic. Everything else seems to exist in that very neurotic meta world invented by Facebook and Twitter, which I am clearly interacting with, but I'm very, very wary of it, you see. The language used. I mean, it's the only way I could find to describe what was going on. I wanted this man to explain himself. Please prove us wrong. Please prove you know what you're talking about. Please prove that these very aggressive comments you're making in some of your film, and they're very aggressive, have got any basis in reality. Now, where my friend commented, he does seem to struggle to actually reference any recognizable reality a lot of the time. What he's referring to is the real world of support services, autistic children and their families, how things work with charities. That's what he actually means. Now, at this stage, we've jumped the gun in the timeline, because what has happened is the dialogue I'm about to go back to. That's when I say poor man is using a load of rhetoric and material others have fed him. And I also need to point out that nobody in this dialogue is a child. You are reading the words of serious grown people. I'm damn near 60. My friends there, they've all got children. We're in the world of autism, okay? You're not reading a bunch of, well, people who haven't been around a bit. So if you think the language is a bit strong, what's being said is a bit strong, look, this is our idea of being nice, okay? Of being considerate. We're trying to make sense of what we've been receiving before you condemn us, condemn myself for being something, a hypocrite in the face of what I initially said. I'm sorry, but you're not dealing with children. And to conclude, we've got the reference to ADW and a reference to some other people who are noted as being part of it. So now we've just had a quick flash of the large posting on Facebook Messenger. We're back in the dialogue. Here we go. The first thing I wanted to say was, yes, he was aware of all these questions. Look at that. I counted 7 questions. On the YouTube video, I counted 5 questions, 12 questions. Did I get answers? Largely no. And he uses excuses for not answering. Excuses. Why was the grown man not able to address the issues no matter what language was used? And believe me, he wasn't using offensive language at all. I was levying charges against him. You've already had a sense of the language I use, and you will get more. You can make your own mind up. Now, I want you to look at what he says. But it seems fairly like one of those slurs the usuals throw about. What's he talking about? What's he talking about there when he says the usual? And the answer is, it was yet another hint that he was part of this group I'm talking about, who engage with other people and negate everything they say and won't listen to them. Who is this Dave Francis? I've never seen him around any dialogues I've been part of. No one I knew has ever heard of him. He just came out of nowhere. Was he using pseudonyms? Was he hiding his identity on dialogues? That's what I want to know. Who is this man? Really? Why is he saying what he's saying online? The mystery will deepen as we go on. So I explain what I meant by ADW. Simple. It also has to be noted that right from the start with the first comments I make about it won't end well, he seems to have taken off on an aggressive attitude and he won't calm down. What is interesting is that later on he does actually calm down. He completely changes his tone and becomes a very reasonable man, like absolutely nothing has happened. But while he's upset, he doesn't address anything I'm saying. Whoa! Well, sports fans, for all of you who have been waiting for the main event, this is it. This is what I was referring to in the early dialogues on my Facebook main page. Get a load of that. Let's pick out some of the main hits. Regressive ideology and newspeak, intolerance towards parents, intolerance towards objectors, demands of folk to subjugate themselves and their identity to a superior, sociopathic, narcissistic carry on. And in that paragraph, he does actually confirm what my friend was saying about the Irish Facebook page, the comments on the Dublin autism page by the AU ambassadors, apparently denying anti-disability legislation. Well, how could people that I know deny that? I have absolutely no idea. But this apparently was what he's referring to as toxic autism advocacy. But notice also how he describes what we've seen so far. Your thread, your inference-fueled rants, the derogatory inference, the threatening message. What? The attempted coercion and the grooming. Grooming, you are mine, you will obey me. The gaslighting of the cohort, eh? The taking over, the assumption of intellectual superiority. What, me? I'm from Liverpool. And the popery style infallibility and omnipotenti fili. Fantastic. I love the stuff he comes out with. Now you understand why we thought he might be schizophrenic or learning disabled. Where the heck is all this coming from? What? The attempted coercion and the grooming. Gaslighting? Of the cohort. You mean, does that, are you using the term to mean a group of people who are reading? What group? Taking over, really? Oh. So then we go, given you are already deeply embedded in the cognitive dissonance hole, which presumably means what exactly? That anything I hear that I can't accept, I can't handle, and I obfuscate it, and I see black as white and up as down because that's what my group says. This is a perfect example of the ADW. That's what they were doing. You'd talk to them, ask them a question, they just ignore you and answer any way they wanted. One fella I remember just used to go around in circles using very sophisticated terms and concepts because he could articulate them. And many of them did what's happening here. I recognize the style. Now, how the hell you managed to work out all of this about a complete stranger on the basis of a few paragraphs of dialogue, I've absolutely no idea. But as you will see, I just calmly tried to get answers out of him, because what you've got here is a huge wall of agenda and this is what's going on, what I say, not you. And the idea is that you get overwhelmed by it and then you start subscribing to his frame of reference, in which case you're lost, as you see. And there's all these huge amounts of criticisms thrown at you. If I'm on the receiving ends of attacks of any nature that are organized and designed to cause alarm and distress, you already identified yourself as bring a catalyst. What on earth does that mean? I don't really know, but just keep reading. So then he says, I made a review on the movie, music, my video on functioning labels and support needs. I'm aware you are not a man of great reasoning or critical thinking, but that type of thing is a love of mine. He's such a good judge of character. I got a philosophy degree. Nobody ever talks to me about my philosophy degree. Nobody ever thinks. I've forgotten all about it anyway, so I guess he's got a point. Like I say, toxic autism advocacy is regressive and oppressive. It lacks congruence. Right. And usually the most vocal of toxic advocates are either connected or promoted to some local authority or CG-funded charities. So whatever that means, he's now identified toxic advocates, the most vocal, as people who are working for what? Major autism charities and organizations? Well, isn't that a bit odd? Surely people would have noticed this by now. I mean, what he's saying is that he most objects to people who actually do what I do. And I find this a bit peculiar that he would make a statement like that. He's clearly defining his own agenda in terms of concepts and terms, an attitude which he feels he can entirely justify. And I think the last part of it, last sentence, is a perfectly good question. So here he lies his head off. He says, you tell me, Paul, you're the one contacting me. When actually, no, he started the whole thing in the first place, and I moved the conversation to Facebook Messenger. He also says, I'm in the middle of working with people. We will be addressing the inferences you made next, mate. ADW, the claim that I am ADW, whoever that is. Well, I did try to explain that. And I have replied, have you contacted your government over your claims? You see, I'm trying to say, look, if you think that autistic advocates are taking away funding to families like your own, well, have you been onto government about this phenomena going on? Have you started getting ideas that people are taking away funding from the severely disabled? Don't you think you should contact the authorities or even the police over this? And then he says, were you involved in the Council of Puppet protest? And I said, yeah, sure. As I say in the next slide, it was me who organised it. Now, the thing with that was that he'd had free rein to look on my Facebook page, and I think he'd seen the photograph of myself at the protest for the All in a Row play, which was, I think, when was that? Beginning of 2019? I don't remember. It was the theatre at the Elephant and Castle where it was on, and I stood outside with a whole load of advocates. I asked everyone to come along on social media. We got a bit of a number up, got the papers over, and we gave out leaflets. And it was as simple as that. We didn't stop anyone going in. We just tried to raise their awareness with our presence, and then we all went home. And the run of the show All in a Row went on, and the press commented on the event that I'd organised happening, and they didn't bother to talk to me or anyone else involved if they could help it, because they were too interested in the people in the show to actually talk to any autistic people to find out what they thought. Evening Standard did ask me the odd question. I think I might have been quoted in that. And it was mentioned in the Stage and Television Today that I'd organised it. Now, at this point, with all the strong language and everything you're reading, you've got to remember that all he's referred to so far is things that people he doesn't agree with have said on social media or in print, or maybe they were lucky on the telly. But because we're autistic advocates, we don't usually get onto the main media, although you do get the odd article, which is, as far as I'm concerned, quite good. You get the odd interview. I'm sure most of what he's read when he's referring to these charities is things that people have written. And I think the majority of his interaction, if at all, with people he disagrees with is on social media. You think that he's talking about people manning barricades outside of support services or firebombing autism charities. No, all this is a grown man disagreeing with the opinions of others. And he seems to have this strange idea that if people say things he disagrees with, well, you've read what he's got to say. It's completely over the top, as far as I'm concerned. Then he says, what I do find confusing is the creepy nature of your chat. Do you have any other diagnosis other than autism? Which I don't. Exactly. Now you understand the schizophrenia learning disabled reference. But then he says, how do you rational your view on functioning levels with your colleague? So at this stage, I have to admit that I'm trying to decode what he's saying, because this use of language and concepts is rather obscure. And then he says, you don't carry on and on and on and on about it. About what? Your view on functioning levels. What does he mean by that? I'm trying to work out his language. So I assume he means people with autism versus autistic people. Some people functional, dysfunctional, able, disable. I don't know. Is he talking about Asperger's syndrome? That infamous snob term? I mean, I am in some ways functional, in other ways I'm dysfunctional. You can define me as disabled. If you look at certain elements of my nature and my history, you can see there is ability and there is disability. Sure, yeah, that's the same for all of us, and it varies with each individual. But I then told him the truth. I said, look, we don't see function. We work with people to get. We work with a D, get to know people. Ah, I miss. See, he's been getting the language. I got the language wrong. What did I mean by that? We just work with and get to know people. The N is missing. That's what I meant. Then he said, I'm asking why you don't object when your colleague raises objections. And what on earth does he mean? Let's have a look at the next slide. And I say, well, I don't understand. Terms like you describe are no big deal. If you want to say autism is disorder, who's going to stop you saying it's a disorder? Who's going to stop you going to a local authority and saying, I have a disorder and that disorder is autism? And they'll go, oh, yes, everyone calls it disorder, because if you don't call it disorder and disability, you won't get support services, which is the game. Anyway, he says you recognize autism as a disability and severe autism labels on your channel. However, functioning labels turn your colleague off. I wonder who this colleague is. I was wondering how you managed to juggle the rational. Let's have a look at the JPEG he posted. Right. He's talking about Emma Dalmain, my friend Emma Dalmain. And this is a post she made about the Osimi Brown protest that we staged outside of the Home Office. I did several of these protests, and the Home Office eventually allowed Osimi Brown to stay in the country. I don't know if you can read it. You just got to look up the Osimi Brown online. So then I said, well, yeah, sure, Asumi is an individual case who is disabled and it's attributed to his autistic nature. I said people have different frames of reference. Some are disabled, some are not disabled who are autistic, and some are both at the same time in different ways. You've got to be able to prove disability. It's not a given. You have to have the conditions of a disorder to be disordered. You have to be actively 24/7 disabled by something for it to be a disability for you. You see, what I say is that autism is not an absolute thing. It is not simply one thing. Someone like Dave Francis is obsessed with being a disorder. For me, it's all about individuals. Some individuals are definitely disordered. It's a slam dunk. It's like being deaf. You can't hear. That's it. You're disordered. With the brain, it's a bit trickier than that. And this seems to be why there's so many arguments. Now we have some pretty straightforward statements by Dave Francis, which I decode as best I can. With all due respect, I'm trying to understand what you're saying here, Dave. And I reply, it's strange how you seem to want to complicate a simple concept. In the US, autism must be called a disability in order to get support. That's our culture. You see, the way my mind works over all this, I don't know where he's getting all this energy from, all this complication from, alluding to it all being very complicated. It's not. Families don't get enough support. Autistic people never get enough support. You can't have people like myself take away support services from the severely disabled, because it just does not work like that, because they are disabled. They are severely disabled. I didn't even mention autism. See what I did then? I didn't say severely disabled autistic or autistic adults like myself taking away support services from disabled, severely disabled autistics. It's the disability you've got to look for. It doesn't matter why somebody is severely disabled, they are severely disabled. And that's why they should be supported. The whole autism involvement, the whole involvement of autism in this disability argument is a red herring, okay? If you can't feed yourself, you can't look after yourself, you're always going to need support. You need your parents to be immortal. That is being severely disabled. Autism can be traced to be the cause, sure, but there could be plenty of reasons why you're like that, okay? I believe all disabled people should be supported. Would I give up my own support services if I had any for the severely disabled? Well, I think it was fair, because I relatively don't think I need support at all. I work for an autism charity. What do? I have had jobs with my charity supporting the disabled. Okay? I've done it for a living. I don't think Dave does that. I'd like to know. So at this point, we're seeing it again. The reason why they thought there was something going on with the man. I have been nothing but polite in response, and I reply, me too. I'm sorry if you find me offensive. The USA is Florida, man. It's as irrelevant to me as Timbuktu. Wish them all the best, but I live in the UK. Again, this tactic of going off at a tangent. You're on a point, he goes off, starts saying things that have absolutely nothing to do with what's being said, as far as I can tell. And then I try to concede. I say, look, in the end, people just say it's a disorder in order to pacify people. The truth is individuals say it's always a disorder. So you could say, everyone no. Wink, wink. No, sorry. As with, yeah, sure, it's a disorder. Oh, you autistic? Yeah, it's a disorder. So people automatically get support and understanding, even if really they're not people who will never be able to live independent lives. They're autistic. And To say it is a disorder could be seen as appreciating the daily struggle that all of us have to cope, as I certainly do, to relate to the world, to cope with the world, someone like myself with a job and a relationship. Nonetheless, as with Dave Francis, we go through a great deal in our heads all the time to cope with being autistic people in the neurotypical world. That's what I'm trying to say. It might sound so far that I don't understand that, but I do. We all of us suffer. Autistic people, we've all suffered. We all have a hell of a lot to handle in the real world, and I do appreciate that. And I typify it myself. It's just that I don't give it away how much I suffer. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to say. Then I ask a question. I don't think I said it very well, actually. I don't think I said it very well at all. That is my failing. Okay, so I have to concede to that. And then I asked him, well, why is it so important to you? We get an answer. We have hard fought laws and acts that protect black, white, rich, poor, gay, straight, disabled, and abled from hate speech. The USA has legislation allowing a person the right to preach hate and intolerance. Hopefully they'll catch us one day. Okay. So, well, it's a nice thing to say. He suddenly changed his tone and he's become very reasonable and nice to me. And I reply, I'm sorry, but you keep making obtuse statements that are confusing and not on the point. Sounds like tactics. What is your objective, please? And he panics and says, Jesus, look, Paul, you have a huge box in your head filled with bad things and thoughts. You took one or two things I said and popped it in there. Right. There is nothing I can do or say that will change that, and you will continue to play daft mind games. I have things to do in life, so I'm going to end the conversation and leave you to your Here's Johnny, carry on. That's quite an obscure reference, Here's Johnny. It was a TV series in America. Maybe he's watched The Shining, it gets referred to that. And I replied, you could have just answered my questions. I have to ask again, have you contacted your government over your claims? Because I was trying to get an answer about whether or not he'd actually done anything about this belief that toxic advocates were taking away support from vulnerable autistic people. A tactic I used at the end of the dialogue, the last dialogue we had, when I started it again. Oh yes, I contacted him in the end because he became really, really nice to me. And I thought we could have a pleasant chat. Maybe I could get it out of him where the evidence was that all these autistic families and these mentally disabled people were getting support taken away from them. And then we get yet another inferred assumption, as I think Dave would say. What is the experience you have working with the charity as far as parents are concerned? You had some strong opinions on. Did I? Really? Overall, do you feel positive or negative about parents? It's a conversation, Paul, not interview. Jesus, your hard work. Just asking him questions. I tried to respond. I said neutral, but always supportive of brave parents. All parents are brave people. And I do deeply respect what parents go through. I've got a pretty good idea of what it's like being the parent of an autistic child, particularly a disabled one. Never mind someone like myself. And my father was on the spectrum. My mother's daughter, half sister, was obviously autistic, a very successful woman, but obviously on the spectrum. Like myself, really, much more functional than me. I would dare use that language, and yeah, I had nothing against. But it was a very odd question. What do you think of parents? He didn't say parents of autistic kids. He just said parents in general. Hey, oh yeah. Just nothing but respect for what they go to dealing with kids. My wife and I were a bit old to have children when we got together, and as my wife put it, we had too many bad genetic markers, so we made a decision that we wouldn't try for children or adopt. It was just the way we wanted to live our lives. We've got nothing against kids at all. It's very personal information to give away, but he seems to be somebody who thinks he can ask you questions like that. So then I try and help them look with these questions, and I post one of us posts the screen grab about the questions, which you've seen. I said, okay, shall I send them? Go and find them. And he replies, he replies to something I've said previously about, has anyone ever said to you, use your own logic, said you live in a world of your own? And he replies, I said make a video response and we can go from there. Well, here it is. But it evolved to here as the zoo mentality is based on your page. What on earth does that mean? Then he says, this is the creepiest, most bizarre conversation I've ever had. Right. So again, we see why I had assumed he had mental health issues. He was learning disabled. He seems to come out with this stuff. I can't relate to it. Maybe I've made a total mistake. I should apologize. He's nothing of the sort. He's just one more autistic like the rest of us who kind of relates his own way, sees things his own way. I am wrong in this. I admit I have been wrong. But I honestly, when I wrote what I wrote on Facebook, I couldn't understand what was happening. And it was somebody else in the dialogue said he might be learning disabled because I couldn't understand what was happening. So unable to deal with any of this, I just tried to ask him another creepy question. Have you contacted your government over your claims, please? And what causal link evidence have you got that autistic advocates like us, because I'm trying to explain to him he's the same thing as me, educated, jobs, relationships, etc., are taking away funding from charities? And you got this bizarre explanation, government claims, LOL. Well, again, I'm trying to assume what on earth that means. Where? What claims? I think this is all in your imagination. And he replies, right, Paul, got things to do, but my guess is thus is life for you. Speak later, we will continue the here's Johnny and maybe find ourselves together what your problem is. We've made progress though. So I try to be nice to him as well. Oh, I'm off home now. So later I will find you the meaning of contacting your authorities so you can ask them. So, okay. And then we get this. And I actually just lost my temper here and confronted him. I said, because you don't have anything apart from others talking rubbish to you, do you? So what is the point you are making about the process? Because this was getting ridiculous. This man is abusing me, accusing me of grooming and brainwashing and God knows what. So I said, I just stood up for myself because you don't have anything apart from others talking rubbish to you, do you? Because it was obvious to me that this man had been groomed and indoctrinated himself because of 3 years of saying this on social media. And he replies, common denominator with your issues is you, Paul. And I reply, that makes no sense. I do not have fantasies about being blocked due to cheerful autistics. Which means I do not have fantasies about finding myself blocked due to being cheerful about autistics. I think that's what I was saying because it was getting a bit ridiculous. Then he says, anyway, got to run. I'll leave you to crack on and target someone else. Well, can I just point out how we met? He got onto me. This was all his idea. He wanted to talk to me. Is that why it's called AIM? That was funny. Come on, I deserve a lol for that much. And he's referring to Emma Dalmain's Autism Inclusive Meets Charity. And I think what he means is that I'm working for AIM in our conversation. I'm representing somehow. I don't know. So you can see what I replied at length. So then, in reference to the Irish Facebook group, I gave him information of who to contact in Ireland if he believed that money was being taken away from charities. There, he quotes one charity Reagan had its funding taken away because of advocates. And I explained who to contact. I went to lengths and found out Roderick O'Gorman and Rabbit. Simple as that. If you've got any issues, contact these people, explain what's going on. Don't worry about people like me. Go straight to government. Same thing if you're in America, go to power, go to your senator, put a case, explain that people like myself need to be executed or not allowed to speak, and that all funding for all autistics should only go to families with the most severe autism. And Dave hasn't actually indicated a sliding scale of how functional or dysfunctional he means in terms of severe. Maybe some people who are severely disabled by being autistic aren't as disabled as some others. And should the money be divided up proportionally? That's what I'm not being funny here. I don't know how it works. How could it work? So again, we get another response, which is entirely him. This is what he says back. Paul, the point in that video is some people say definitely wholly inaccurate things relating to all autistic people. Well, to be more specific, you mean things that you don't believe in. Typical self-centered autistic. Hey, I've been like that myself. They rubber stamp everyone and stereotype all the unfair. That isn't fair. Stereotypes are harmful. My autism means I'm generally, I think it means dysfunctional, but I crack on with life and numerous health concerns. My outlook on life is that I see people as potential friends, not potential enemies. Also do I. I have 5 minutes, so I'm making a meme. I never saw this meme. Paul, get off the pedestal. It's two people talking. You see at the end, he's doing it again. This is why I assume there's something going on. And I give a perfectly reasonable set of responses to what he said. Where I say, beware of whoever gave you all those nutty ideas, you can understand what I'm trying to do. Because so far, I don't know. I assume people have given him all these ideas. That, again, is a failing on my part to make these assumptions, as I'm sure you're thinking. But really, I've heard all this so many times before. So with this, he replies, fascinating spin you put on your post. Is this how you plan to spin the harassment? What harassment? I blocked him. As soon as I found out what he put on his, I just blocked him. As you can see, he's anti-positivity, accusing him. Well, yeah, Dave, you are anti-positivity. What is your position in autistic inclusive meets? Is it what you call me in your page, Attack Dog? No, I'm not actually anything to do with it. It's just a friend of mine runs it. I'm not actually involved in AIM. Okay, I just go to the odd group and have a cup of tea with people. No, not a cup of tea, have some water with people. And then he says, nothing is private, Paul. We all screenshot things. Ah, we are not, we do. It's the proof. We are not friends, and you clearly have a negative intent towards me, as our content with manipulating and antagonizing. See, there it is again. This is, I didn't realize at the time, so you treat everyone as an equal. You must be a very vulnerable person. And I need to consider that I've been talking to somebody who's put himself up for it in this dialogue, but really, I'm dialoguing with, I'm talking to somebody who's not really able to handle me. And I should have owned that at the time. So then he says, I'm certain you have practiced the art of trolling many times before as per threats. I will leave you to it. I do invite you to make your video. It will be fun. Dave, mate, here I am. Other than that, cheerio. Which I reply, why is everything about combat? Can't you just reason? Well, okay, but you won't like it. Well, hey, we're going to find out. It will take, I will make one this week. Sorry, but doing things I didn't. Because obviously it was after this I found out what he put on his Facebook page and was just horrified. I realised you couldn't reason with this man at all. Just remember that autistics tend to operate from obsessional, self-focused ways of seeing everything. I am not like that, and am regarded as such. You will, of course, see yourself as the objective one. We tend to do that, which seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But he replies, you are the one person in this chat, aside from the threats, and another on your page with a Lord of the Flies tinge. What that means, I don't know. It's just, you can see what was on my page. I am no stranger to attacks and abuse, being a victim of this when younger. Then he starts to give away all this private information. So I do not like the several fave approach. I have no idea what that means. Your page is not full of reasoning people. It is riddled with trolls. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Do the video, and when I get time I will reply. I do not encourage trolling of vulnerable people, but I will not be a victim of intimidation or harassment either. I am cross with the threat still. It won't end well comment. It is a big barrier and I struggle with that type of thing. I do not like aggressive people. And I replied, you mean people who disagree with you? If we all agree, are we then not trolls? Which he replies, cut the insults, the attempts to make the conversation personal, and the insane ad homonyms out, and it becomes as reasonable a conversation possible between two people with communication difficulties. You have rarely answered a straight question, seem to be a straightforward answer. And he replies, no review, Paul. It is a conversation, not an interview. I'm about to fly at the moment. I'm at Gatwick. I'll try find time to continue with the chat. Going off a lot of your activities, we do agree on many things, or we more than likely came to similar views by different life paths. What are we agreeing on? I don't see anything we're agreeing on at all. What is this? It seemed to me that this was a hook he put in to try to make out that he was a reasonable person and he could concede and we could get on, because he wanted me to continue, because he was off on his holidays, you see. This is another tactic I reckon he used. Again, he says, actually what he meant was ad hominem, which is where you say all criminals are murderers, but then a thief isn't a murderer, so therefore you can't be a criminal. It's a basic logical paradox. Then we get the line, if you are too paranoid to be that way, then there is really no point in having a conversation. Again, he's stated quite a reasonable request about the Sunflower lanyard. And I said, sure, thank you and have a good holiday. It is my hope we can resolve everything, come to a mutual conclusion, and we can stop all this stuff and we can make sense. But then, I think it's 2 days later on the 23rd, uh, I had talked to people about this and considered the dialogue and decided no, I didn't want to be involved with this man. He was frightening me, and I didn't want to continue talking to him. I didn't like what was going on. I didn't think it was coherent. I think he had a very bad attitude. So I defriended him on the 23rd, and I said, I'm sorry, but I think it's best we end this dialogue and go our separate ways. Thank you for your ideas, and I will take them on board. And I defriended the man. I didn't want him connected to my friends and myself. And he replied, and he was absolutely charming. On the 25th of August, he came back to me 2 days later and said, truly hope you do, Paul. Good luck and all the best. And I said, thank you. So that was the end of him until the 10th of September when he came back. And this is the point. He didn't just befriend me in the first place. I cut up with him. He returned to me. Now you've got to remember what he said in that post I found on his page, that I was harassing him and trolling him. So 16 days later, he comes back and he's very polite. Paul, hope you are well. Sorry if I'm bothering you, not the intent at all. I've asked certain folk on the opposing sides of this advocate divide what the issues are. Neurodiverse rebel at all, but nobody seems able to or can just summarise the actual facts. I won't take sides personally. I hate fallouts. Aside from initial silliness, you have been better than most, so I thought I may be able to ask you. If you don't want to reply, that's fine. So best wishes, I've waited. Now, I could have terminated the dialogue at this point. I knew what he was talking about. But I thought, well, maybe we could start again and we could repair it, and he's not that bad, and I need to apologise. So I continued. You can see what I wrote. So here I am in hospital. My wife is off having a quick x-ray. I just thought I'd add to the film by saying I wasn't kidding. Some of us, we can substantiate our claims, we can provide proof. This is what proof looks like. I say my wife has had a diabetic turn at a bus stop. I have to run off and jump in an ambulance, which I did, literally run about 50 metres across all these bus stops and jump in. Well, then I do. So that's me making claims. Hello again. I'm back for the second part of the film, as far as I'm concerned. That was me demonstrating what it looks like when you provide proof of a claim you've made, which I think is a very salient concept to bring up. Mindful that this is now over 57 minutes long film. I don't think anyone's going to finish it, but if you want the truth, it's all here, and it takes a while to go over it. See, these dialogues simply aren't that simple. So anyway, I think all you have to do is read this particular slide, and then we'll go on to the next one. Now, I've had the decency to take out people's names here, but I think it's easy to explain that a certain person, a woman, a mother, had others go to her employees with evidence of what she'd done, and the employers acted on that evidence. They didn't have to, but they did. And they fired her, and they disassociated themselves from the brand name they've been using and created another brand name. And they took Emma Dalmain on and associated with Emma and AIM instead. And that's what happened. Then we've got this rather interesting paragraph about group I came in contact with and came across about 2019 seem to have been operating ever since, trying to character assassinate anyone who disagrees with them over their use of the term autism and their frame of reference of autism is basically focused around the parents of severely disabled children. They think anyone like myself who's positive about his autistic identity, and that's all I do, by the way, is some kind of monster who has to be stopped, and they're prepared to say anything about you online. It was quite apparent from Dave's Facebook that he had taken sides and was associating with those particular people through people I could name he was friends with. One particular character as a kind of a Dr. Goebel figure to the people I'm referring to. And he himself, Dave, was making up these rather perverse childlike memes, which I can show you. I can include one now. Yeah, exactly. And there's quite a lot of this about, if you know the right places to look. And there's another one. which you can see has got the character's got a Just Frank baseball cap on that is meant to push his particular take on the whole debate, which, as I've explained, seems to have just been manufactured by these people, his so-called side, in order to have some kind of conflict, in order to negate the arguments of others. It's actually a bit sad because if you consider the dialogue that Dave and I are having and the way we relate and what we've got in common, from a great enough distance, we're exactly the same thing. When the slide says autism is an ethnicity, what they're trying to say is that we are a community, we are a kind, and I'm afraid Dave's doing a very good job of relating to me and me to him. So if I were you, Dave, I'd stop doing that and start going back to your old befuddled, game playing, unpleasant self, because then people will see an autistic person who's relatively disordered in their thinking and behaviour and think, oh, right, you've got a point there. Instead of all this coherency that you go on to produce, and you're going to have a complete personality change in a minute. So here I just give some examples of what I'm talking about, and then he says he'll read it. And here I talk about the autistic dark web. My hobby was on buses and trains in 2019. They were great fun. They were sociopaths. You try and reason with them, they'd ignore you. They just go around in circles in front of you. They seemed to think everyone they dialogue with was too stupid to work this out. They were only interested in their own argument being seen publicly. They seemed to be using tactics to cause meltdowns in autistics in order to eliminate autistics from social media. They saw themselves as the only people who knew what they were talking about, to the point where they couldn't reason with the people who were trying to talk to them. So they just patronized them, took the piss out of them. There's no other phrase I know that quite describes what they were up to. And were generally obnoxious. And they used to go around the internet finding people and picking on them and trolling them quite badly. And it all ended because it turned out that one of them, who I challenged about his identity, was in fact somebody completely different, as I thought. But none of us, the ADW or myself, the people I name, none of them realised he was actually a multiply convicted child rapist and paedophile pornographer. And I'm not saying that any of the people that I name or any of the people in the autistic dark web group, and they identified as being a group or a gang, any of these anti-neurodiversity movements, they described them, knew that this man was a paedophile. But what was really funny was that they all had the characteristics of being a neurodiversity movement themselves, as I outlined earlier. They all got on together, they all agitated together, they held ideas in common, they had positive ongoing relationships on the basis of being autistic, and they all worked together against others as a nasty, aggressive gang, whilst constantly trying to make out the opposite. And then there was a little matter of them all being intellectual snobs. So on top of all that, autism is only a mental disorder and a disability. They then proceeded to believe that they knew better than other people and they thought more clearly than other people, which doesn't make sense of this, psychiatric disorder, as it's sometimes being called. Guys, really think about what you're doing. And then you get a totally different Dave Francis. You get a very rational man making a perfectly good job of writing out his ideas. Maybe it's because he's not on the phone anymore and he's able to sit down and write stuff out. And you get this, and it's like somebody else has stepped in and is using the dialogue. It's all completely different. I don't understand this either. This is why people talk about being schizophrenic or learning disabled. Like, we couldn't understand what was happening with this man. That you've got a man who was obviously using tricks and tactics to obfuscate and abuse you. He starts accusing me of all manner of nonsense, as you've heard earlier. And then he comes on like this. He's a totally different person. But this was, I think it was 13, was it 13 days later? I think it was 16 days later. I think it was 16 days later. Yeah. It was the 25th of August I saw the back of him, and then the 10th of September he's back. And he's completely different. So I thought, oh, great, you can talk to this guy, and you can see how I've tried to relate to him. So have a read. So at this stage, you get nothing but coherency out of him. You got a different personality, makes a lot of sense. Feel free to stop it and read it. And then we got another page. All is good. Poor fella's not very well. It's okay. We're communicating. Then the 11th September, are you there? Then the 12th, the day after, he's communicating. I keep in touch with him, trying to talk to him. And then we have another little chat, and I give him a screen grab from something I put on Twitter and see what he thinks of it. Just having a little chat on the 22nd. And he gives me his opinion. Which is fine until he says, that's why I'm opposed to ASPI shutting down lifelong caregivers of severely autistic people. And I said, how can anyone do that? Do you have any proof this goes on? He says, it happens. And I say, where, when? Starts being funny with him. He says, lots of love. And I say, well, prove it. And he says, why? How can people like us influence such support services? And it's a simple question. But then he seems to change, as he often does. You get this sudden personality change. He starts asking me questions like, what is it like to be the parent of a severely autistic child, Paul? Well, it's got nothing to do with me. My representation of autism is completely different. My life is completely different. Tell me your day-to-day life. So it was quite late at night, and I thought, right, this is it. I'm going to challenge this guy. I've got him. He started being funny with me again. I want to know, has he got any proof of the claims he makes in his films and what he just said? So I start, where is the proof of all claims? Then I said, lies, fantasy. Challenging him. What is it like? And he keeps going on. What's it like having kids? What's the question got to do with the claims he's made that advocates or ASPIs, whatever he wants to call us, are doing this? And I reply, you have no evidence, do you? And he says, you're losing it again. Losing it. Hey, you see, when he gets challenged with a question he can't answer, he starts to make you out to be mentally ill. And I wasn't interested by the obfuscation and the usual trying to get off the subject. I just wanted a straight answer if he had any evidence or proof, because this is the main argument that the people in the group I associate him with have. That all these people that I talked about, dark web, these parents, this bizarre parent group in America, is always the same thing. So I needed to challenge him on that basis, and you can see what I'm writing. And then I'm afraid it all goes a bit peculiar. You can see what I'm writing, where are the proof he claims. In your head, you're on the hunt for questions. In my head, you're a guy that randomly messages people to argue. Yeah, sure, randomly message them, okay. Yeah. When have people like you and I shut down or affected any support services of the disabled? You are you and I are me. We are nothing alike. Well, how's that an answer? And then we start getting some really odd things. I don't mind different opinions. You can't tolerate any other opinion. Hey, well, how did that concept come into it? Then he writes, I was raised on beatings. You were probably a regular middle-class kid. Well, I don't know where that came from. I was raised on beatings. I was actually a working-class Liverpool child in the 1960s and 70s. I think you should think about that. And the autistic son of an equally undiagnosed autistic man. I really think you should use your imagination, but I was all right. At this point, the English starts to get a bit bizarre. You keep repeating the same thing while all you need to do is look at the chat and your profile page. Going off that alone from when connected, you embellish that. I have no idea what that means. So are you on the AIM payroll? I don't know. I just kept asking him the question so there was an answer. When you have any so-called high-functioning autistic self-advocates removed or affected services to the severely disabled, please answer my question. When have they done that, I mean? And as you can see, we're still getting nowhere. And I challenge the ways relating. Did someone tell you that autistic self-advocates speaking relating themselves the way you and I do on social media is taking away funding from the disabled? I keep trying to explain to him that he's the antithesis of what he keeps representing. And he replies, do you know how to hold a conversation with mainly expressive language? Exactly, he keeps coming out with these comments. Then he accuses me of being stoned and drunk. And I keep asking, have to go to bed, and this is it. Where is your evidence of proof? And he says, Paul, in your own mind, you know what you are talking about, but in my mind, you are harassing me. You have already made threats. I have no idea. So then, of course, he starts becoming defensive and using some of the tricks he's made before. I don't know. I'm just trying to get an answer. I keep pressing the point, and he threatens to block me. And so I said, so now you admit you have been lying all along. No one is hurting autistic children by being advocates like you. And I keep trying to make him realise what's happening. It's right over his head. And then he starts coming out with his own frame of reference again. And there you go. Are you diagnosed with any other conditions? There must be something wrong with you, the way you're behaving. Totally defensive. Who told you this is okay? Well, it used to be a conversation. And then we start to get an answer to my question. Why are you so interested? This is harassment. I've made you aware of it several times. And I reply, well, no, show it to others. It's called being asked a simple question, which is to give you a chance to prove what you're saying is true. I am listening. I am here, Dave. I see you. So please prove your claims that autistic self-advocates like us using social media hurt disabled children. And then I go for the kill, basically. And you can see what I say. Please stop bullying me. Stop talking rubbish. Just give me proof of your claims. And then he starts saying stuff like, Paul, you are my number one troll. You will always be there for me. I've answered you question, do you have any other diagnosis? It's then at the bottom we finally get somewhere. We get the sentence, if support and funding goes to you, then it does. Finally, we start to get an answer. Are you in any way financially benefiting from a local authority funded charity? It's a simple question. I think any autistic that is funded by a local authority or central government should not be threatening disabled people. Who is threatening disabled people, I ask. If you can prove that, you can go to the police and they can act. And he replies, harassing or otherwise, we've already gone over your question and what the video relates to. No, we haven't. Because if you follow this film, you can see he never gives an answer. So I keep going. And in the end, he says, I'm off my nut. Do I sound like I'm off my nut? Exactly. It's always defensive. And then he quotes the beginning of the conversation when I'm perfectly polite to him. I don't know. I don't know. Hope you can read it. It was the first thing I said to him when he befriended me, and I got onto Messenger with him to take him off my page because people were going to have a go at him and it wouldn't end well, which is what I meant by the comment that he then took as some kind of threat when I'm just trying to help him. You're aware of the comments I made on my own page. He could see those. He could comment on those. It's that simple. It's a public page. It's what they call anyone could comment. So he could have, even if he wasn't my friend, he could have still commented on what was being said. And another thing is, what was he doing looking on my page in the first place? If he ceased to be my friend on the 25th of August and it's now 22nd of September, he's been monitoring what I've been saying. You tell me. Mate, you're off, you're not. Look, you need help and I'm not the right guy to help you. But we did get some kind of answer. Then finally we got to the last bit, where he's relating to me as being crazy and he can't reason with me. And it was after this I discovered what he'd done. Bon voyage. I'm trying to keep him going to get a rational answer out of him. Do you have a diagnosed delusional condition? Yes, it's called not being able to substantiate my claims, David. Right, and then he says he's going to contact AIM in the morning and NAS, National Autistic Society. I'm not sure what about. I think on your vids you said you work for them too. Well, this was what was commented on him by my friend. He didn't seem to be able to relate to charities and seemed to have a bit of an issue about talking about what he's actually talking about, if you see what I mean. On his films, he makes his claims about charities. completely untrue. He offers no proof of anything he's saying. So I challenge you here and now to do that. And there is this really weird line. We are repeating conversations here and going off early reruns. There was an alternative conversation on your homepage for younger folks being manipulated by. What on earth? What you mean there's children reading my Facebook? Hey, honestly, do not get your connection to AIM, not what I expect. It seems to be in his imagination, and that was the last contact I had with him. Now, it was after that I bothered to look at his page, and I found what was at that point something that could be seen on his page, anyone could see, which has now disappeared, which is a bit odd because it says 22nd of August, so I'm not actually sure how I managed to see that, but I managed to see it somehow. If it was just friends, I think he'd made it global. I don't understand how I managed to get the image at the date that I did, but when I did in September, that was it. I immediately blocked him when I saw that, and I found it the day after the dialogue that we've just concluded on. And that was the end of Dave Francis. He's lying his head off. So it says I represent Autistic Inclusive Meets, and he calls it a charity, which it is not. And he claims that AIM targeted a cuddly teddy bear a while back. I think what he's talking about is the All in a Row play, where they used a Muppet to represent an 11-year-old autistic boy. And he's referring to the protest I mounted outside. AIM were nothing to do with that, and they're not a charity. And then he comes out with the line, shame they can't have a campaign to weed out Aspie supremacy, bigotry, gaslighting and online trolling. Well, what on earth has any of that got to do with me? I don't know. And he says, of course, randomly contracted by a creepy vibe guy says he is associated with some charity in London. Oh. He'd lost it, spent his afternoon dreaming up more conspiracies than Alex Jones. Proceeds to threaten me. So there you go. See, I blocked him as soon as I found this. And I haven't had anything to do with him since. I find this whole thing very disturbing. And I think that's the end of the film. I could have said more, but I don't really want to say anything else. I just think that the whole thing is bizarre and pathetic, and I want nothing to do with him again. Thank you.